During the Second World War, the United States had the advantage that we were fighting this war far from our shores. Our population was protected by the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans, but that didn't mean, of course, that the United States was free from attack, most notably the attack on Pearl Harbor. But the Japanese Army and Navy attacked the U.S. Pacific territories. They occupied the Alaskan Aleutian Islands of Kiska and Attu, and the German U-boats hunted in American territorial waters in sight of American shores. But less well remembered is the fact that the Axis were able in the Second World War to directly attack the continental United States. And while those attacks didn't do a lot of damage, they did cause fear and paranoia and affected Allied decision-making. It is history that deserves to be remembered. The Imperial Japanese Navy had ambitious plans at the start of the Second World War. Much like the American Doolittle raid in April of 1942, their goal was to demonstrate that the U.S. mainland was vulnerable to attack, to spread panic, disrupt military operations and commerce, and force the redeployment of war resources. On December 14, 1941, orders were given to a submarine flotilla under the command of Rear Admiral Tsutomu Sato to launch a coordinated attack on U.S. West Coast cities on Christmas Eve. 9 Japanese submarines were ordered to fire 30 shells each, an attack that would likely have caused widespread panic. But the attack never materialized, as the submarines were busy pursuing enemy shipping, and eventually ran low on fuel and had returned to their bases to resupply. But the idea had not been forgotten. On February 22nd, the Type B-1 submarine I-17 received orders from Admiral Mitsumi Shimizu, the commander of Japanese submarine forces, to shell a U.S. West Coast target of its choice the next day. The U.S. had been suffering a string of defeats in the Pacific. In fact, the same day, February 22nd, President Roosevelt had given the order for General Douglas MacArthur to evacuate the Philippines. On the 23rd, FDR was going to do one of his famous fireside chats, intending to raise national morale. The Japanese attack was intended to commence during Roosevelt's speech. There are conflicting stories regarding why the I-17 chose the target they did, the Elwood oil fields near Santa Barbara, California. The simplest explanation is that the boat's chief engineer suggested the target as providing easy access and an escape route. An alternative story suggests that the captain of the I-17, Imperial Japanese Naval Commander Kozo Nishino, had visited the oil fields as a merchant mariner before the war and had been embarrassed by some American oil workers there who laughed at him after he tripped into some prickly pear cactus and was out seeking revenge. The Type B was a cruiser submarine. They were large, displacing more than 1,000 tons more than the U.S. Gato-class submarine. They had a cruising range of some 14,000 nautical miles, mounted 6 torpedo tubes, and had a relatively large 140mm deck gun. The I-17 had a crew of 101 officers and men. Perhaps most interesting, the Type B cruiser submarines carried a single Yokosuka E-14Y float plane, which they would disassemble and fit into a watertight hangar in front of the conning tower. The seaplane would be launched by a catapult and was primarily intended for reconnaissance, but mounted a single 7.7mm machine gun and could carry 2 incendiary bombs. The Elwood oil field lay about 12 miles west of the California city of Santa Barbara. Oil was first discovered there in 1928, and the field had been named after Elwood Cooper, an early rancher in the area. The oil field was highly productive through the 1930s and helped to drive development in the Santa Barbara area. More importantly, the location of the oil fields along the coast and into the Santa Barbara Channel allowed easy access for a submarine attack. The I-17 opened fire with its deck gun around 7:15 p.m., targeting fuel tanks belonging to the Bankline Company oil refinery along the shore. They continued firing for about 20 minutes, firing an estimated 12 to 25 rounds. Contemporary newspaper reports said that the attack was first reported to police by a Mrs. George Heaney of San Marcos Pass, who observed the submarine through binoculars and reported it was about a mile offshore. Firing in the dark, the shells mostly landed far off, one impacting on pasture land of a ranch 3 miles inland, leaving a crater but damaging no structures. As many as 2/3 of the rounds landed harmlessly in the water. The attack missed the refinery, but did minor damage to a derrick and pumping station about 1,000 yards inland, and caused no casualties. The submarine escaped before there could be any military response. The attack on Elwood was the first bombardment of the continental United States by the Axis powers of the Second World War. While it did little damage, the attack had a psychological impact. 2 factors ended up becoming significant. First, witnesses reported that flares had apparently been fired from the shore in an apparent attempt to signal the submarine, and another witness claimed to have seen the submarine giving light signals as it fled, apparently signaling to someone on shore. None of these reports turned out to be reliable, and it is unlikely that the I-17 had any assistance on shore. But some claim that the reports solidified public support for the internment of Japanese citizens in the United States. A second rumor also had an impact, as one of the witnesses claimed that they saw the submarine leaving, heading south, towards Los Angeles. The military and the civilian press concluded that either the submarine attacking Elwood was moving towards Los Angeles, or that the attack was a diversion from a larger attack. The next day, Naval Intelligence issued a warning that an attack on Los Angeles could be expected within the next 10 hours. The air raid sirens started blaring at 2:25 a.m. on the 25th, and the so-called Battle of Los Angeles began in earnest at 3:16 a.m. as the 37th Coast Artillery Brigade opened fire at Japanese planes coming to attack the city. The battle raged for almost an hour with over 1,400 shells fired. The battle cost the lives of 5 Los Angeles area civilians. The Japanese had managed to attack the mainland United States with war jitters. There were no Japanese planes over LA. The firing, it seems, was precipitated by an errant weather balloon. The civilian casualties were all the result of the ensuing chaos. 3 died in car accidents and 2 died of heart attacks. In addition, buildings and property were damaged by the falling anti-aircraft artillery fragments. The Imperial Japanese Navy, it seems, had found some success in their goal of panicking the U.S. population. But that doesn't mean that the Imperial Japanese Navy was not capable of actually attacking the U.S. shore. The following June, another Type B-1 submarine, the I-25, followed a group of fishing vessels to avoid minefields and came within 10 miles of the shore of the mouth of the Columbia River at the border between Oregon and Washington. It was a strategically important spot, as Liberty ships, vital to the war effort, were being produced on the Columbia River in Portland. Defending the mouth of the Columbia on the Oregon side was Fort Stevens. Fort Stevens had originally been built in the 1860s to defend the Columbia from a potential attack by the British over boundary disputes. It had had new batteries installed, but its coastal guns were largely outdated, turn-of-the-century era pieces. The I-25 fired 17 shells against the fort and its battery Russell. The I-25 was firing from miles offshore and reportedly thought the fort might be a submarine base. The garrison was roused, but found it difficult running around in the dark. The battery commander, Captain Jack R. Wood, later said of the incident, "We looked like hell, but we were ready to shoot back in a couple of minutes." But the fort garrison was ordered not to respond, instead ordering a blackout. The location of the submarine was still not clear, and revealing the location of the battery's guns, and possibly their vulnerabilities, would have been more dangerous than the few 5.5-inch rounds lobbed at the fort. The shots did little damage, downing some power lines and destroying the backstop of the fort's baseball field. It was the only time that the Axis powers attacked a continental United States military installation during the war, and the first time that the state of Oregon was directly attacked by a wartime enemy, but was not the last that the state of Oregon would see of the Japanese submarine I-25. Having already attacked the U.S. military on U.S. shores, the I-25 had another plan of attack. The following September, the I-25 was back off the coast of Oregon. Their plan was to have their E-14Y float plane drop incendiary bombs in the Siskiyou National Forest, starting forest fires that would destroy timber resources and divert manpower. The plane, piloted by Warrant Officer Nobuo Fujita, with Observer Petty Officer Okuda Shoji manning the rear-facing machine gun, made 2 bomb raids, each time dropping 2 168-pound incendiary bombs. But September is not forest fire season, and there had been substantial rain, making it difficult to start fires. In addition, forest rangers had seen at least one of the bombs explode and had gotten to it quickly and controlled the fire. The raids caused negligible damage, but they were the only time during the Second World War that the continental United States suffered an air raid attack by enemy forces. The I-17 did do some more appreciable damage off the coast of Oregon, where it sunk 2 merchant vessels, killing 6 merchant mariners. Perhaps the most frightening of the Japanese attacks on the continental United States were the Fugo fire balloons. Made from traditional paper, these 33-foot diameter, unmanned hydrogen-filled balloons leveraged the jet stream and required a complex and ingenious combination of ballast and a self-regulating release to maintain altitude for the approximately 3-day trip from Japan to the United States. The wind conditions were only suitable for some 50 days out of the year. After 3 days, the balloons would drop their ballast, igniting a fuse that would destroy the balloon and release its bombs, usually a mix of incendiary and fragmentation bombs. Over 9,000 such balloons were launched, with the goal of causing terror and possibly starting forest fires. They were the first weapons of war with a truly intercontinental range. They landed as far inland as Nebraska, as far north as Alaska, and as far south as Mexico. On May 5th, 1945, in rural eastern Oregon, 5 teenage students from a Sunday school class and their pregnant teacher were killed when they discovered a downed balloon and apparently handled the apparatus, causing it to explode. More terrifyingly, there had been plans to arm the balloons with biological weapons, anthrax, bubonic plague, and cowpox, but the Emperor himself refused to allow the deployment of the biological weapons. U.S. scientists were able to determine the location where the balloons were being launched by analyzing the sand in the ballast, and U.S. bombing raids destroyed 2 hydrogen production plants nearby. A tight news blackout of the threat convinced the Japanese that the campaign had failed, and they stopped the launches after about 6 months. The Japanese attacks on the U.S. mainland did minimal damage during the Second World War, but they did raise invasion fears, cause panic, and cause some large deployment of resources. For example, 2,700 U.S. servicemen, many of them conscientious objectors, were deployed to fight forest fires in the Pacific Northwest that were started by the balloon bombs, and one member of that detachment did die fighting forest fires. Hundreds of miles of barbed wire were laid across the California coast for fear of the non-existent Japanese invasion. At times, the response was greater than the attack. When a Japanese submarine fired at the Estevan Point Lighthouse in western Canada in June of 1942, they did no damage to the lighthouse. As a response, authorities decided to turn out the lighthouse lights to protect it from further attack. That caused a shipping hazard and, de facto, had the same result as if the attack had destroyed the lighthouse. Perhaps the largest impact was to increase American mistrust of Japanese Americans. There were all sorts of rumors of people on shore collaborating with these attacks, and while those rumors have been discredited, they did help to solidify American resentment towards its own citizens. Forestry workers in British Columbia discovered the wreck of a Japanese balloon bomb in 2014. Demolition experts destroyed it with explosives. That raised the prospect that the wrecks of some of the balloons and their deadly payloads may still be out there in remote areas where they still could potentially be a hazard. Of over 9,000 balloons launched, only around 300 have been found. In a strange twist, the town of Brookings, Oregon, which was nearest the spot where the Japanese conducted bombing raids on the Oregon forests, asked the pilot who had dropped those bombs, Nobuo Fujita, to come and visit their town. The invitation caused some controversy in Brookings as there were still several World War II veterans living there. Fujita was afraid that they were going to accuse him of committing war crimes, but instead they treated him warmly, and thus began a friendship that began to symbolize the rapprochement between the American and Japanese peoples following the Second World War. Fujita donated his samurai sword to the town of Brookings, where it's on display in the Brookings Public Library, which Fujita helped to raise funds to build. He sponsored to have Brookings area high school students come and visit Japan, and he came back and visited the town many more times. Fujita passed away in 1997 at the age of 85, and his daughter brought a portion of his ashes back to be interned in Brookings, Oregon, where he had been made an honorary citizen. A passage in Fujita's diary reads, "If we knew each other, if we understood each other as friends, this foolish war would never have happened. I sincerely hope that the time would come when everyone can overcome their differences with talking and not fighting." I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy, short snippets of forgotten history between 10 and 15 minutes long. And if you did enjoy, please go ahead and click that thumbs up button. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions for future episodes, please write those in the comment section. I will be happy to personally respond. Be sure to follow The History Guy on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and check out our merchandise on teespring.com. And if you'd like more episodes on forgotten history, all you need to do is subscribe.